This week's tip is about yarn over or eyelet buttonholes. And by the way, there are a ton of versions of the eyelet buttonhole, but this is the simplest one. And eyelet buttonholes are made simply by making a decrease and a yarn over, or a yarn over and a decrease. Just depends on which way you prefer. And they are very easy to make in all stitch patterns, except for ribbing. And by the way, they don't look that great in K2P2 ribbing. There are other versions of it that will look better. When you're going to make this decrease or this buttonhole in ribbing, there are two ways to approach it. And in one way, you make the yarn over before the stitch, and in the other one, or the decrease, and the other one you make it after. And it doesn't really matter which way you do it, because it's going to look exactly the same. Now let's say that I have marked the two locations, and in ribbing, the best place to work the yarn over is over a purl stitch, because when you look at ribbing, the purl stitches recede and the knit stitches stay together. And if you have the ribbing or the buttonhole on the knit stitch, it disrupts the stitch pattern. So it's a better way to place it is if you're going to make your yarn over on top of a purl stitch. So this is where I want my buttonhole to be, on that stitch. And one way to make this is I work to the location where I want my buttonhole to be, and I want it to be where that purl stitch is. Now the reason why this is it makes a difference is that when you're using a decrease, that is always going to place one stitch on top of another. And if I have a knit stitch here and a purl stitch here, I want the knit stitch to be over the purl stitch so that the pattern will be maintained. It's just going to look a lot better. So if I make my yarn over here and I knit these two stitches together, then I have my yarn over, and we'll see what happens on the next row. And there are my two stitches. The knit stitch has gone over that purl stitch, and when the ribbing is like this, you don't even really see the stitches at all. But if I spread it out, I will see my buttonhole quite clearly. Now, where I want my other buttonhole to be is right here. And another way to approach this is from this side. If I want my buttonhole to be over that purl stitch, if I use an SSK decrease, that means that the stitch to the right, this knit stitch, will go over the stitch to the left, and it will cover that purl stitch. So I do slip, slip, knit, and I am missing my yarn over, so I make it, and there we go. Now those two decreases do exactly the same thing in the buttonhole. They cover up the purl stitch where I'm placing my buttonhole, and it's going to look exactly the same. And does it matter which one I pick? No, really doesn't matter at all. It just depends on how you like to make it. Now when I work that next row, and I just work in pattern, knit, and purling, purling, and my next stitch here would be a knit stitch. I'm on the wrong side of the work, so the knit is going to be a purl on the other side. Purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. And there we go. I've got my two buttonholes, and you really can't tell where those decreases have been made. That is the glorious thing about making a decrease where a knit is over a purl. It doesn't even seem to slant in one direction. It looks like I've got just my lovely maintained columns of knit stitches. So it doesn't really matter which one of these I pick. The results are going to be exactly the same. So to sum up, if you're making this this buttonhole in stockinette or seed stitch or in some other stitch pattern, garter stitch, doesn't really matter. You can do your yarn over, your knit two together, just however you want to work it. But if you're making it in ribbing, you've got to take more care.